The Hive Queen's body twitched and spasmed as the Earth-bred nanite swarm ravaged her central nervous system. Human-made microscopic machines brutally overriding her biological processes as punishment for underestimating the primitive species from the backwater blue planet. Just hours ago, she had been preparing her invasion forces to swarm Earth, a new conquest for her ever-expanding galactic empire, confident the soft bipeds would be easily crushed. Now, as her vision blurred and dimmed, she finally understood the whispered warnings to avoid the remote Deathworld at all costs. Earlier, human explorer Jesse Clark spit blood onto the face of Murloc, the burly feline Caitian commander, pinning him against the shattered remains of his spacecraft. Jesse laughed off the snarled threats, defiant even as the alien soldiers murmured at his brazen disrespect to their revered leader. No puny Earthling captive had ever shown such insolence before the might of the Caitian Star Empire. Enraged, Murloc backhanded Jesse viciously, the savage blow knocking the human out cold. He ordered his warriors to drag the limp body to the city for interrogation and live dissection to unravel the secrets of Homo sapiens' absurd overconfidence. As Jesse was hauled away, sinister rustles and blood-curdling screeches from Kate Prime's lethal jungle fauna hinted this was no ordinary planet. If Jesse can't escape and warn Earth in time, humanity will be woefully unprepared for the Hive Queen's ravenous hordes and their cruel Caitian allies descending from the stars. Our species' very survival depends on this lone human explorer trapped deep behind enemy lines. But the Hive Queen and her minions are about to learn the hard way what happens when you dare to test mankind's mettle. Jesse's eyelids flickered open to a dank, dimly lit cell deep within the bowels of the Caitian prison complex. His head throbbed from the vicious blow Murloc had dealt him, and as he tried to move, he found his wrists and ankles restrained by strange chitinous shackles. Slowly he pulled himself upright on the slab-like cot protruding from the cell wall and took stock of his surroundings. The bare cell had nothing but the cot and what looked like a waste disposal slot in the corner. The cell door appeared to be made of some kind of translucent, amber-colored resin. As Jesse struggled to his feet, the resin door suddenly dissolved, and Murloc strode in, 2 guards at his back. The burly Caitian commander wasted no time with pleasantries. "What are you, Earthling? Where do you come from? Why have you trespassed on Kate Prime?" Murloc snarled. Jesse met Murloc's glare with a defiant smirk. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize this mudball belonged to you overgrown house cats. My bad." "Or what, you'll cough up a hairball on me? I'm shaking in my boots." With a roar, Murloc's frustration boiled over into brutal violence. His fist slammed into Jesse's face and body with savage force. But to the Caitian's shock, Jesse simply laughed through the blood choking his throat. He spat out a tooth, grinning ferally up at Murloc with crimson-stained teeth. Unnerved, Murloc gestured to the guards. "Take this freak to the fleshcrafters. Let's see if their blades can loosen his tongue." Dragged into a stark experimentation chamber, Jesse was strapped to an ominous-looking table. A Caitian in a dark smock loomed over him, cold curiosity glinting in its slitted eyes. Jesse couldn't understand the alien's words, but from the eager way it selected a wicked-looking scalpel, the intent was clear. The fleshcrafter's blade sliced into Jesse's skin with surgical precision, peeling back layers of flesh and muscle. Agony lanced through him as the creature probed and examined his internal workings with a fascinated diligence. But Jesse gritted his teeth, determined not to give his tormentors the satisfaction of hearing him scream. He retreated deep into his mind, focusing on thoughts of Earth, his family, his drive to protect his species. Hours later, the fleshcrafter seemed to tire of its grisly work. Jesse, on the verge of blacking out from the pain, was unceremoniously dumped back in his cell. As he lay there, consciousness fading in and out, he became aware of a strange sensation. The searing pain of his wounds was fading, replaced by a tingling, almost itching feeling. Blinking the blood from his eyes, Jesse stared in disbelief as the deep lacerations and punctures left by the fleshcrafter's tools began to knit themselves closed at a remarkable rate. Realization dawned. The fleshcrafter's probing must have uncovered and activated some kind of accelerated healing ability, perhaps a long dormant evolutionary adaptation. Despite the agony he'd endured, a small fierce grin tugged at the corners of Jesse's mouth. If these alien bastards thought a few cuts and bruises would break him, they had no idea what they were dealing with. Humanity was made of sterner stuff than they could possibly imagine. And now he had a new ace up his sleeve. The Caitians had no clue what kind of enemy they'd just created, but they were about to find out the hard way. Days blurred into weeks as Jesse endured an endless cycle of interrogation, experimentation, and healing in his cell. The Caitians were fascinated by his resilience and regenerative capabilities, but frustrated by his complete refusal to cooperate or provide them with any information. No matter what they did to him, he would not break. One day, as Jesse lay on his cot recovering from the latest round of experiments, alarms began blaring throughout the prison complex. Explosions rocked the facility, and the sound of gunfire and screams echoed through the corridors. Jesse sat up, his heart pounding. Was this some new form of torture? Suddenly his cell door dissolved, and a group of ragtag aliens burst in. A massive reptilian Krogan, a lithe avian Turian, and a diminutive amphibious Solarian. "Jesse Clark?" the Krogan rumbled. "We're here to get you out. Your people sent us." Jesse stared at them in disbelief. "My people? You mean humans?" "That's right," the Turian said. "When your ship disappeared, they started digging. Eventually they figured out the Caitians had you, so they hired us to bring you home." As they raced through the chaotic prison, dodging gunfire and leaping over the bodies of fallen Caitian guards, the mercenaries filled Jesse in on what had happened. Apparently his ship's disappearance had prompted a major human investigation into his whereabouts. When they discovered he'd been captured by the Caitians, they'd sent this mercenary team to extract him by any means necessary. They burst out of the prison complex to find a war zone raging in the streets of the Caitian capital city. The mercenaries led Jesse to a landing pad where a Caitian dropship sat unguarded. The Solarian hacked the ship's security systems, and they piled aboard. As they lifted off and blasted away from the city, a swarm of Caitian fighter craft rose up in pursuit, filling the sky with deadly plasma bolts. The dropship shuddered as several shots struck its shields. "We've got company," the Turian yelled from the pilot's seat. "Someone get on the guns." Without hesitation, Jesse leapt into the co-pilot's chair and seized the controls for the dropship's weapon systems. Despite his weeks of captivity and torment, his human spatial awareness and reflexes were as sharp as ever. He swiveled the turret around and opened fire, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds, ripping through the pursuing Caitian ships. One by one they burst into flames and plummeted from the sky, until none were left. The mercenaries stared at Jesse in astonishment. "Nice shooting," the Krogan said, sounding impressed. As they tore through the skies over the dense jungles of Kate Prime, Jesse felt a fierce grin spread across his face. After all he'd endured, it felt good to finally fight back. The dropship broke atmosphere and rocketed into space, leaving the planet behind. But on the bridge of a massive Caitian dreadnought in orbit, a grizzled old Caitian commander watched the hijacked ship streak away. He turned to his subordinates, his eyes narrowing. "Relay a message to the Hive Queen," he growled. "Tell her the creature has escaped, and we now believe we know what it is. A human. She will want to hear of this." The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances, knowing the Hive Queen's wrath would be terrible. Her plans to invade Earth were well underway, but this human's escape could jeopardize everything. If he made it back to his people and warned them. As they pushed through the crowds of heavily armed thugs and smugglers thronging the corridors, a squad of humans suddenly emerged from the shadows, assault rifles leveled at Jesse's group. The mercenaries tensed, fingers tightening on triggers, but Jesse waved them down. "Hold up," he said. "I think these are my guys." The lead human, a grizzled, heavily scarred man, stepped forward, his eyes hard and appraising as he looked Jesse over. "Jesse Clark?" he grunted. "Hawkins, Cerberus Wetworks. We're your extraction." Jesse nodded, holstering his weapon. "Pleased to meet you. Mind telling me what the fuck is going on?" Hawkins gestured for them to follow, leading them through the twisting warren of corridors. As they walked, he debriefed Jesse in terse, clipped sentences. "Your little exploration mission. Bullshit cover. You were there to gather intel on the Caitians' military capabilities, their invasion plans. Cerberus has been hearing rumblings for a while now, and your job was to confirm the worst. And when those fucking cats captured you," he shook his head grimly, "let's just say the stakes have gotten a lot higher." Jesse absorbed this in silence, his mind racing. All this time he'd thought he was on a simple recon mission. Now it turned out he'd been a pawn in a shadowy game of interstellar espionage, with the fate of humanity itself hanging in the balance. As the group emerged into a cavernous hangar bay, a tremendous explosion suddenly rocked the station, throwing them off their feet. Alarms blared and emergency lights strobed as the deck shuddered beneath them. Hawkins was on his feet in an instant, his rifle snapping up. "Fuck, they tracked us!" Across the hangar, the hull of a docked freighter peeled back like foil, revealing the glinting carapaces of Caitian shock troopers swarming into the bay. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as the aliens opened fire, scattering panicked station denizens. "To the frigate now!" Hawkins roared, laying down a blistering hail of suppressing fire. Jesse snatched up a fallen smuggler's rifle and sprinted for the Cerberus ship, the mercenaries close on his heels. Plasma scorched the deck plates around his feet and slagged equipment exploded as he ran, but he didn't slow. His body still ached from his torture at the hands of the Caitians, but adrenaline and desperation drove him on. Diving into cover behind a cargo crate, Jesse braced his rifle and opened fire, the weapon bucking against his shoulder. Caitians fell, ichor spraying from shattered armor. Beside him, Hawkins and the mercenaries poured on the firepower, cutting down the attackers in droves. But more kept coming, heedless of their losses, driven by their fanatical duty to the Hive Queen. Jesse gritted his teeth and kept firing, alien blood spattering his face. The Cerberus frigate loomed ahead, its boarding ramp down, beckoning to them like the gates of heaven. Inch by blood-soaked inch, they fought their way to the ship, a trail of Caitian corpses marking their passage. At last, they stumbled up the ramp and into the vessel, the hatch slamming shut behind them. The deck lurched sickeningly as the pilot wrenched the ship into the air, even as more explosions tore through the station. Viewports flared white as the frigate's engines roared to life, hurling them away from the doomed station and into the star-flecked void. But even as the ship leapt to FTL, fleeing the carnage behind them, Jesse knew this was only the beginning. The Caitians would not rest until they had the human interloper who had defied them, and if Cerberus was right about their invasion plans, the fate of all humanity hung in the balance. Jesse stared out at the blurred starscape, his jaw set with grim determination. He had a feeling that before this was over, oceans of blood would be spilled on both sides. But if it was war the Caitians wanted, then war they would have, and may the gods have mercy on them all. The battered Cerberus frigate shuddered as it limped into the hangar bay, its hull pockmarked with scorch marks from its narrow escape. Jesse staggered down the ramp, his injuries from the torture and the desperate battle aboard the station taking their toll. Hawkins and the surviving mercenaries followed close behind, their faces grim. A welcoming party awaited them, led by a tall, distinguished-looking man with piercing blue eyes and a face lined with age and worry. He introduced himself as the elusive man, director of Cerberus. "Mr. Clark," he said, his voice gravelly, "we have much to discuss. Please come with me." Jesse followed the elusive man through the winding corridors of the base, deep within the uncharted asteroid field. They entered a dimly lit command center, holographic displays flickering with data. The elusive man turned to face Jesse, his expression grave. "The situation is far worse than we feared," he said. "The Caitians are not merely an aggressive empire, they are a fanatical doomsday cult, led by a monstrous queen who believes it is their destiny to consume and assimilate all life in the galaxy." Jesse felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "The invasion fleet heading for human space. is just the beginning," the elusive man continued. "It's merely the vanguard of a much larger armada being assembled in the heart of Cation territory. Their goal is nothing less than the complete subjugation or extermination of humanity." Before Jesse could respond, alarms suddenly blared throughout the command center. Red lights flashed as a technician shouted, "Sir, Cation ships emerging from FTL on the edges of the asteroid field. They've tracked us." The elusive man's face hardened. "All personnel to battle stations, engage base defenses." Jesse and the Cerberus operatives rushed to their posts as the base shuddered under the impact of the first Cation shots. In the chaos of the battle, Jesse found himself cut off from the others, cornered in a corridor by a hulking Cation warrior in powered armor. The Cation lunged at him, razor-sharp claws slashing. Jesse dodged, his weakened body screaming in protest. He lashed out with a kick, but the Cation's armor absorbed the blow. The alien seized him, slamming him against the wall with bone-crushing force. Stars exploded across Jesse's vision, but he fought through the pain. His hand scrabbled at his belt, fingers closing around the hilt of a combat knife. With a roar, he plunged the blade into the gap beneath the Cation's helmet. The alien stiffened, ichor spurting from the wound. It crumpled to the floor and Jesse staggered to his feet, panting. He stripped the armor from the corpse, donning it himself. The HUD flickered to life, alien symbols scrolling across the visor. Armed with the Cation's weapons, Jesse fought his way through the base, cutting down the invading forces with ruthless efficiency. He battled his way to the hangar, where a sleek black ship sat waiting, a prototype stealth vessel, he realized. With no time to lose, Jesse clambered aboard, powering up the unfamiliar controls. The hangar shook as more Cation ships touched down, disgorging troops. Jesse slammed the thrusters to full, and the stealth ship rocketed out of the hangar just as the Cerberus base's defenses crumbled behind him. Plotting a course directly for the heart of the Cation Empire, Jesse gritted his teeth, ignoring the blood seeping from his many wounds. The Hive Queen was out there somewhere, plotting the downfall of humanity, and he would stop her, even if it meant facing the entire might of the Cation Armada alone. As the stealth ship knifed through the void, Jesse's thoughts turned to Earth, to the billions of unsuspecting humans going about their lives, unaware of the doom hurtling towards them from the stars. He had failed to stop the invasion, had only delayed it. But he would not fail again. He would find the Hive Queen and end her no matter the cost, for he was human, a member of a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer tenacity and indomitable will, and he would not let that light be extinguished. Not without a fight. The sleek, angular lines of the Shadowhawk sliced through the void, its matte black hull blending seamlessly into the darkness of space. Jesse sat in the pilot's seat, his eyes focused on the holographic displays flickering before him. The intelligence gathered by Cerberus had proven invaluable, guiding him through the treacherous network of Cation patrols and sensor arrays that guarded the Hive worlds. As the ship approached the looming bulk of the Cation homeworld, Jesse's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The Queen's Palace, a twisted organic structure that seemed to grow from the planet's blasted surface, filled the view screen. Suddenly the ship shuddered violently, caught in the grip of a powerful tractor beam. "Shit," Jesse muttered, his hands flying over the controls in a futile attempt to break free. But it was no use. The Shadowhawk was dragged inexorably towards a cavernous hangar bay that yawned open like the maw of some colossal beast. As the ship settled onto the hangar floor with a metallic clang, Jesse took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He donned the captured Cation armor, the alien metal molding itself to his body like a second skin. With a hiss of hydraulics, the ship's hatch opened and Jesse stepped out into the hangar. A phalanx of Cation royal guards awaited him, their chitinous armor glinting in the harsh light. At their head stood a figure Jesse recognized all too well, Murloc, his former captor. The Cation's body was now a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, his injuries from the prison break replaced with gleaming cybernetics. "Well, well," Murloc sneered, his voice a metallic rasp. "The little human pet returns. I knew you couldn't stay away." Jesse said nothing, his face an impassive mask beneath the armor's helmet. He allowed himself to be surrounded by the guards, their weapons trained on him. Murloc gestured imperiously, and the group began to march through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. As they walked, Jesse's eyes darted from side to side, his armor's sensors covertly scanning and recording every detail of the palace's layout and security measures. Data streamed back to the Shadowhawk's computer, building a comprehensive map of the alien stronghold. Suddenly the group emerged into a vast vaulted chamber that pulsed with a sickly bioluminescent light. In the center of the room, a colossal, grotesque form writhed and undulated, the Hive Queen herself. The creature's bulbous, pulsating body was a nightmare of chitin and glistening flesh, her multifaceted eyes glittering with malevolent intelligence. Human, the Queen's voice echoed in Jesse's mind, a psychic assault that sent shards of pain lancing through his skull. You dare to invade the sanctum of the Hive? Jesse gritted his teeth, his will hardened by the ordeals he had endured. He pushed back against the Queen's psychic intrusion, his thoughts a fortress of defiance. Your reign ends here, you overgrown cockroach, he spat. Humanity will never bow to you. The Queen's fury washed over him in a tidal wave of psychic rage. Insolent primate, you will learn your place. She gestured with a segmented limb, and the guards seized Jesse, dragging him towards a pulsating organic portal set into the chamber's wall. Take this filth to the assimilation chamber, the Queen hissed. Let him be processed and remade in service to the Hive. As Jesse was hauled away, he caught a glimpse of a massive view screen dominating one wall of the chamber. On it, the Caitian invasion fleet hung in space, a swarm of chitin and metal poised to descend upon the worlds of humanity. The sight sent a chill down Jesse's spine, a grim reminder of the stakes at play. But even as he was dragged into the bowels of the palace, towards the horrors of the assimilation chamber, a grim smile tugged at the corners of Jesse's mouth. The Queen had no idea what she had just invited into the heart of her domain. The human pet she so despised would be her undoing. It was only a matter of time. In the nightmarish depths of the assimilation chamber, Jesse found himself strapped to a grotesque pulsating apparatus that seemed to be a hellish fusion of organic matter and alien technology. His armor and weapons had been stripped away, leaving him utterly vulnerable. The chamber swarmed with Caitian fleshcrafters, their chitinous bodies bristling with razor-sharp implements that glinted menacingly in the sickly, bioluminescent light. The fleshcrafters descended upon Jesse, their appendages clicking and skittering over his bare skin. Suddenly, searing pain lanced through his body as they began to cut into his flesh with surgical precision. Strange, glowing fluids were injected into his wounds, spreading like icy fire through his veins. Jesse felt his consciousness beginning to slip away, his mind assaulted by an overwhelming alien presence, the Hive mind. It battered at his mental defenses, seeking to break his will and subsume his identity into the collective consciousness of the Caitian Hive. But Jesse was no ordinary human. His mind had been honed by years of rigorous training and unbreakable discipline. In a desperate act of will, he focused his thoughts on his mission, his duty to protect humanity from the Caitian threat. He clung to memories of Earth, of the billions of lives depending on him. His indomitable human spirit surged forth, a blazing beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. To the shock of the fleshcrafters, Jesse's body began to resist the assimilation process. His cells and tissues, strengthened by the Cerberus enhancements, fought off the alien bio-nanites, rejecting their insidious influence. The glowing fluids sizzled and evaporated as they met the resistance of his immune system. Seizing the moment of confusion, Jesse flexed his muscles, straining against the organic restraints with all his might. The apparatus shuddered and tore as he pushed beyond the limits of human strength, his body surging with adrenaline and a newfound, almost superhuman power. With a roar of fury and exertion, Jesse burst free of the restraints, the tattered remnants of the assimilation apparatus falling away from his body. The fleshcrafters chittered in alarm, their appendages raised to strike. But Jesse was faster. He lashed out with his bare hands, his fingers sinking into the fleshcrafter's exoskeletons with savage strength. Chitin cracked and splintered beneath his grip as he tore the creatures apart with a primal ferocity that seemed to spring from the very core of his being. Alarms blared throughout the chamber as Jesse fought his way towards the exit, his nude body a blur of motion as he battled the swarming Caitian guards. Their weapons' fire sizzled past him, scorching his skin, but he barely felt the pain. All that mattered was escape and the destruction of the Hive Queen. Using his stolen knowledge of the palace layout, Jesse raced through the twisting corridors, his bare feet pounding against the pulsing organic floor. He ambushed Caitian patrols, stealing their weapons and armor, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. At last, he burst into the Queen's chamber, a vast vaulted space dominated by the massive, writhing form of the Hive Queen herself. The monstrous creature quivered with rage at the sight of the human intruder, her multifaceted eyes blazing with malevolent intelligence. The Queen locked her gaze with Jesse's, and he felt the full force of her psychic might slamming into his mind like a tidal wave of molten hatred. She sought to crush his consciousness, to break his will, and leave him a drooling, subservient husk. But Jesse's mental defenses held firm. His indomitable human spirit, tempered by the fires of adversity and sharpened by his unbreakable will, turned the Queen's psychic assault back on herself. The backlash tore through the Queen's mind, causing her to reel in agony, her massive form convulsing in pain. Seizing the advantage, Jesse leapt onto the Queen's body, clambering up her pulsating, chitinous hide with desperate speed. In his hand, he clutched a stolen energy lance, its crackling tip glowing with deadly power. The Queen thrashed and writhed, trying to dislodge the human pest, but Jesse held on with grim determination. Higher and higher he climbed, until at last he reached the crown of her swollen, pulsating head. With a final defiant roar, Jesse raised the energy lance high and brought it down with all his strength, driving the searing point directly into the Queen's brain. The lance punctured her armored skull and sank deep into her cerebral cortex, its disruptive energies tearing through her synapses like wildfire. As the Queen convulsed in her death throes, her massive body spasming and twitching, Jesse reached out through the neurolink of the embedded lance and thrust his consciousness into the Hive mind. He could feel the psychic network that connected every Caitian, a vast web of alien thoughts and impulses. With a final titanic effort of will, Jesse transmitted a single overwhelming command through the neurolink, broadcasting it to the entire Caitian species through the dying Queen's mind. The command ripped through the Hive mind like a psychic shockwave, slamming into the minds of every Caitian. Soldiers stumbled and fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. Workers slumped over their consoles, their hands falling still. Across the entire Caitian Empire, every single member of the species collapsed into a deep, dreamless slumber. As the deafening psychic command of sleep tore through the Hive mind, an eerie stillness fell over the Caitian Empire. Mighty warships drifted aimlessly, their crews slumped unconscious at their posts. In the streets of Caitian cities, soldiers and civilians alike collapsed where they stood, their bodies crumpling to the ground like marionettes with cut strings. In the Queen's chamber, Jesse staggered back from the twitching corpse of the Hive Queen, her massive body shuddering in its final death throes. Blood streamed from his nose and ears, the strain of channeling the psychic command through the neurolink taking its toll. His vision swam and his legs trembled, but he forced himself to remain upright. He couldn't rest yet, not until he was off this nightmarish planet. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Jesse limped through the corridors of the now silent palace, stepping over the comatose forms of Caitian warriors and technicians. The once bustling halls were now as quiet as a tomb, save for the distant echoing clang of Jesse's stolen armor against the chitinous floor. After what felt like an eternity, Jesse reached the hangar bay where the Shadowhawk waited. But as he approached the sleek, black vessel, a familiar figure emerged from behind a support pillar, Murloc, his eyes blazing with unbridled hatred. "Oh," the Caitian commander snarled, his voice rough with strain. You think you've won, human? You think you can destroy the Hive and walk away? Jesse eyed Murloc warily, his hand drifting towards his stolen plasma rifle. How are you still awake, the hive mind? With a howl of primal rage, Murloc charged at Jesse, his cybernetic claws extended. Jesse barely managed to dodge the first swipe, the razor-sharp talons whistling past his face. He brought up his rifle, but Murloc was too close, too fast. The Caitian slammed into him, sending them both sprawling to the deck in a tangle of limbs and armor. They grappled across the hangar bay, trading savage blows and vicious kicks. Murloc's claws screeched against Jesse's armor, seeking gaps and weak points. Jesse retaliated with bone-crunching strikes to Murloc's cybernetic implants, sparks and fluids spraying from ruptured conduits. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, Jesse slowly gained the upper hand. His human resilience and advanced combat training, honed by Cerberus's best, proved too much for even Murloc's fanatical ferocity. With a final desperate heave, Jesse pinned the Caitian commander to the deck. His armored knee pressed against Murloc's throat. "Yield," Jesse growled, his voice distorted by his helmet's speakers. "It's over." Murloc glared up at him, hatred and something akin to begrudging respect warring in his slitted eyes. After a long, tense moment, he went limp, all fight draining out of him. Jesse hauled the defeated Caitian to his feet and dragged him into the Shadowhawk, securing him in the ship's brig. The restraints clicked into place with a satisfying finality. As Jesse slid into the pilot's seat, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, the adrenaline of battle fading. But he couldn't rest yet. He had to get word to the human fleet. His fingers danced over the comm controls, broadcasting on all human frequencies. "This is Commander Jesse Clark. Authentication code Alpha Zulu 9er. Mission accomplished. The Caitian threat has been neutralized. I repeat, the Caitian threat has been neutralized." For a moment there was only static. Then a chorus of cheers and shouted congratulations burst from the speakers, the joy and relief of the human fleet palpable even across the vast distances of space. Jesse allowed himself a small, tired smile. The Shadowhawk lifted off from the hangar bay, its engines flaring blue as it clawed for the stars. Jesse watched the Caitian homeworld recede on his viewscreen, a dark, brooding orb shrouded in the silence of enforced slumber. But even as he set course for human space, a nagging unease prickled at the back of Jesse's mind. The Caitians were just one threat in a hostile galaxy filled with alien dangers. Somewhere out there, beyond the cold, glittering expanse of the void, new perils waited. Humanity had won a great victory today, but Jesse knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the struggle was far from over. The Shadowhawk shuddered as it slid into the docking clamps, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the ship's hull. Jesse, his body still aching from his ordeals, limped down the boarding ramp to be greeted by a throng of cheering humans. Soldiers, technicians and civilians alike surged forward, their faces alight with joy and relief. Jesse, overwhelmed by the outpouring of gratitude, could only nod and shake the hands thrust towards him. He had never sought fame or glory, only to do his duty and protect his people. Suddenly the celebration turned to screams of terror as a snarling, hulking figure burst from the airlock, blood dripping from its claws. Murloc, having somehow escaped the ship's brig, tore into the crowd with savage fury, ripping and tearing with abandon. Panic erupted as civilians fled in all directions, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. Security forces, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, their weapons barking as they tried to bring down the rampaging Caitian. Jesse, ignoring the pain lancing through his body, sprinted back into the Shadowhawk. He snatched up his armor, still stained with the blood of his battles, and donned it with practiced speed. Grabbing a pulse rifle, he charged back out into the fray. Murloc, surrounded by a ring of wary security personnel, spun to face Jesse as he approached. The Caitian's eyes glinted with malice, his fangs bared in a vicious snarl. "You think you've won, human?" Murloc hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Jesse leveled his rifle at the Caitian, his finger hovering over the trigger. "It's over, Murloc, surrender." Murloc threw back his head and laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "You fool! The Caitians were merely pawns, expendable fodder in a much larger game. The true masters of this galaxy are the Exalted, and they will not tolerate the rise of your pathetic species." With a roar of fury, Murloc lunged at Jesse, his claws outstretched. Jesse rolled to the side, barking orders to the security team. "Clear the civilians! Get them to safety!" As the security forces scrambled to comply, Jesse and Murloc clashed in a brutal, no-holds-barred fight. They smashed through bulkheads and equipment, grappling and striking with savage intensity. Murloc's claws raked across Jesse's armor, scoring deep gouges in the hardened plates. Jesse retaliated with bone-crunching blows from his rifle butt, driving the Caitian back. The battle raged through the corridors and chambers of the station, terrified humans scattering before the two warriors. Jesse could feel his strength waning, his injuries sapping his stamina. But he pushed on, driven by a grim determination to end this once and for all. In a final desperate lunge, Jesse managed to disarm Murloc. Sending the Caitian's weapon skittering across the deck, he slammed Murloc to the ground, pinning him with a knee to the chest. His rifle pressed against Murloc's skull, the barrel digging into the Caitian's flesh. Murloc glared up at him, defiance etched in every line of his face. "Do it, human," he spat. "End me if you have the guts." Jesse's finger tightened on the trigger, every fiber of his being screaming at him to finish this monster once and for all. But as he stared into Murloc's hate-filled eyes, he hesitated. Was this what he had become? A cold-blooded killer, no better than the enemies he fought against? If he killed Murloc now in anger and vengeance, would he be able to look at himself in the mirror? Slowly, deliberately, Jesse eased his finger off the trigger and stood up, stepping back from the prone Caitian. "No," he said, his voice hard. "I won't stoop to your level. You'll face justice for your crimes, Murloc, but it will be justice dispensed by the rule of law, not the barrel of a gun." As security forces rushed forward to restrain the snarling, spitting Caitian, Jesse turned to face the gathered crowd of humans. Their faces were a mix of fear, confusion, and awe. "People of Earth," Jesse said, his voice ringing out across the chamber. "Today we have faced a great evil and emerged victorious. But as we have learned, our struggle is far from over." He gestured to the restrained Murloc, his eyes hard. "There are greater threats out there, powers that seek to destroy or enslave us. But we will not cower in fear, we will not back down. Humanity will stand tall and fight for its place among the stars, no matter the cost." As the crowd erupted in cheers and applause, Jesse felt a grim resolve settle over him. The battle against the Caitians may have been won, but the war for humanity's future was just beginning. In the wake of Murloc's revelation about the Exalted, Jesse threw himself into his work with a burning intensity. He spent long hours in conference with Earth's top military brass and intelligence operatives, sharing every scrap of knowledge he had gleaned about the Caitians and their enigmatic overlords. In the tech labs, Jesse worked side by side with Earth's brightest minds, reverse engineering captured alien technology and developing new weapons and defenses. He pushed himself to the brink of exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that every day brought the Exalted closer to Earth. But even as he labored to prepare humanity for the coming storm, Jesse found himself haunted by strange dreams and visions. Night after night he awoke in a cold sweat, his mind filled with images of a vast, malevolent presence lurking at the edges of the cosmos. At first he dismissed these nightmares as the product of stress and overwork, but as the weeks turned into months, the visions grew more vivid, more insistent. Jesse began to suspect that they were more than mere dreams, that they were a message, a warning of some impending doom. Delving into the archives of the Cerberus database, Jesse pored over every scrap of information about the Exalted, searching for clues to the nature of his visions. And then, in a dusty, long-forgotten data file, he found it, a fragmentary report from a long-dead alien civilization that had once fought against the Exalted. The report spoke of a fail-safe mechanism, a psychic beacon that would activate upon the death of a key Exalted leader, summoning the full might of their armada to avenge the fallen. With a sinking feeling of horror, Jesse realized the truth. In killing the Hive Queen, he had triggered this beacon. The Exalted were coming, and Earth was their target. Desperate to avert catastrophe, Jesse brought his findings to the elusive man and the other leaders of Earth's defense. He proposed a daring plan, a suicide mission to infiltrate the Exalted flagship and destroy the beacon before it could summon the full armada. Many argued against the plan, calling it foolhardy and impossible, but Jesse was adamant. He had started this fight, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. In the end, the elusive man gave his blessing. A small team of Earth's most skilled and deadly warriors was assembled, each handpicked by Jesse for their unique abilities and unwavering courage in the face of impossible odds. As the sleek, stealthed ship carried them deep into enemy space, Jesse felt a grim sense of purpose settle over him. He knew that this mission would likely be his last, but if he could save Earth, save humanity, it would all be worth it. But what Jesse and his team found aboard the Exalted flagship defied their darkest imaginings. The vessel was a labyrinth of twisted organic corridors and pulsating energy fields, its very structure inimical to human life. And at its heart, waiting for them, was the Overlord, a monstrous being of pure psychic energy, the true mastermind behind the Exalted's campaign of conquest and genocide. In that moment, staring into the Overlord's blazing, soulless eyes, Jesse knew that he looked upon the face of humanity's doom. In a desperate final gambit, Jesse activated the jury-rigged device he had constructed in secret, a psionic feedback loop designed to channel the energy of the beacon back upon its source. As the device hummed to life, Jesse felt the Overlord's malign presence slam into his mind, a tidal wave of pure, devouring hatred. But Jesse held firm, pouring every ounce of his will, his strength, his very essence into the device, and as the feedback loop reached critical mass, the energies of the beacon and the Overlord collided in a cataclysmic explosion of light and fury. In an instant, the flagship, the beacon, the Overlord, all were consumed in the maelstrom of Jesse's sacrifice. And as the light faded, leaving only drifting debris and echoing silence, the Exalted Armada, suddenly directionless, bereft of their guiding intelligence, turned back from Earth, retreating into the void. In the days that followed, as reports of the catastrophic explosion reached Earth, a stunned humanity slowly came to realize the magnitude of Jesse's final victory, and the terrible price he had paid for their survival. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.